Hi everyone, welcome to the presentation of Murder She Modeled, Modeling to Support Criminal Forensic Processes. This is a collaborative work between Chava Dayan at the Department of Criminology at the University of Haifa, Anna Zamansky and Irit Hadar at the Department of Information Systems, also at the University of Haifa, and myself at Northumbria Social Computing in Newcastle. So, this is Dirk van der Linden, or at least Dirk's disembodied pre-recorded voice speaking to you, as right now I'm somewhere in Sicily without too stable of an internet connection to do this live. But no worries, I should be here right with you in the Zoom room. So, for any of you who don't know me, I'm an assistant professor in animal-computer interaction, and yes, I meant to say animal, at Northumbria University. Some of you might remember me from earlier MSATs and KAISES and my work on conceptual modeling and categorization of modeling constructs. And others hopefully might remember me from my main real research focus over the past years, building technology for animals. So yes, it was really animal and animal-computer interaction. Not as unrelated to this research, but it's really cool stuff where we do good in the real world for animals and humans alike. So I like to drop that little tidbit everywhere I can in case someone is interested and wants to learn more about how we develop technology for animals. So if you would like to have a chat or learn about it, get in touch with me for sure. Right. So the big question then, why, Dirk, are you modeling murders? What's gotten into you? Well, you all know I love to collaborate and explore new opportunities to employ conceptual modeling methods. So a while ago, when we got to talking with a criminologist and learned just how much of a difficult or perhaps even wicked problem soft evidence is in ensuring law enforcement gets to the bottom of cases, especially in homicide, we were hooked on thinking how to link conceptual modeling efforts to that. And we got to talking and thinking together how this was, in essence, all kind of a knowledge representation issue where the real complexities are getting the knowledge that is already there and really in depth and like hidden in lots of textual documents, lots of files and data everywhere, to get that knowledge clear to people who just want to get it out there, talk amongst themselves, and maybe communicate it simply to others as well. So, one key thing in modeling murders, or the soft evidence and all the behavior around the murder, is people, of course, try to get away with it. You don't always get a perp like Sideshow Bob wielding his knife as police arrive, making it obvious that he did it. It's also all about the cases where you've got a perp like, well, Sideshow Bob, who's just calmly there because he took a lot of effort before, during, and after the murder to conceal what he did. So he staged the crime scene to make it look like something else happened, something else entirely, a suicide or an accident. And figuring out what they've done and how they've done that, that has to do with collecting soft evidence. So soft evidence is a lot of things, it's all that contextual information about the crime scene, it's behavioral information about the perp, it's all this kind of complicated soft stuff that we need to really carefully consider. And that's where it gets tricky to try and make it a hard modeling affair. And we get massive dumps of data and text to search through. So obviously we want some kind of structure, right? So a first step that we started talking about when we were thinking with the criminologist, how can we employ conceptual modeling methods and help you structure, all your massive text and all your massive crime scene descriptions, is simply converting all that massively rich description of crime scenes. And trust me, you'll be happy we saved you the graphic detail and the full descriptions of these crime scenes into user stories of what a criminal did and why they likely did it. And that allows us to really pull out the key actions or behavioral patterns from it and get it clear really what kind of the flow of actions that a criminal took before, during, and after the murder and the staging of the crime scene. As you can see in box one for the case of People versus Siboni that we modeled in this paper, that involves a lot of different actions that a murderer takes to try and make sure that it's as obvious as possible that it wasn't a murder, it was an accident, or it wasn't a murder, it was a suicide, or simply maybe it was a murder, but it wasn't me who did it. And then the second important step is, of course, doing the same, but for all the actions that law enforcement took. So we also have to model all the actions that detectives and other law enforcement stakeholders did and annotate, especially what they failed to do, what they forgot to do, and even more tricky, what they did, but what was mitigated by actions that the criminal already took before that we captured in the user stories you saw on the previous slide. And the cool thing here is that when we've got all these criminal and law enforcement stories written out, it's already much clearer than just massive data dumps and descriptive text or narratives of a murder. So we can start kind of clarifying the relationships to ourselves between the criminal and the law enforcement actions. And that is the starting point of also making a more clear visual summary of all those actions. So when we wanted to be visual, we thought, what kind of conceptual model can we use? And really, use case diagrams, and including misuse cases, of course, are really a nice application to capture all that information that we already really distilled into the user stories to make all the links between the criminal and law enforcement user stories become really apparent. So here you see for that same Siboni case that we modeled, the key actions that law enforcement took and that the criminal took, and you immediately clearly see how the criminal actions threaten the capacity of law enforcement to discover the truth. And similarly, how law enforcement's actions can mitigate that nasty criminal's actions. So, long story short, it's the same as in any kind of systems analysis. We're using these use case diagrams as fairly simple visual diagrams to communicate a lot more complex information and interactions that are otherwise hidden away in massive data dumps and text. And it lets us clearly see what's going on. And for those of you who are wondering, how would I ever use criminology in my research? Well, consider your teaching as well, because I can tell you from my experience, our students were suddenly much more excited about learning UML and writing use case diagrams when we showed them the example of how to use UML syntax for real world applications like this. So if we have use case diagrams covering all the kind of use cases and misuse cases for a particular homicide scenario, then we can of course generalize a bit more to the main underlying things that happen in a case to get a feeling for the rough flow. And you see that here, that it's really kind of typical recurring actions that are taken that we can clearly see. Like it's always about staging facts about the crime scene, staging the crime scene itself, and perhaps even staging the victim by placing them in a position where it looks like they just had an unfortunate fall. And similarly, you see that the police officers always take the same kind of typical actions that they need to do, like interviewing persons of interest and investigating the crime scenes. Now, one note though that I will say to preempt any meta model or meta model fanatics, this isn't a meta model of crime scene staging, nor is it meant to be, because in our discussions and our work with the criminologists, there simply wasn't a need for that. And I can see that meta models, ontologies can be useful at some point, but when it comes to criminology and what the criminologist really wants, these models are just that simple visual artifacts that help us to stimulate our thinking and our conversation among the domain experts, reasoning about information they already have anyway. It's not used as hard evidence, it's not meant to become directly machine readable. It's loose tools initially to help us think about reality. But what criminologists definitely could use if we want to go towards more well-structured and captured models is actually looking at those patterns that we've been capturing in these models through the use cases, through the use case diagrams that those patterns, if we generalize them to certain levels, we could actually conceive of getting a large set of hopefully nicely modeled and captured patterns of criminal behavior in homicide crime scene staging, which, if we get a decently sized database and all the associated model artifacts, that could theoretically be linked all together to build some kind of system to help detect early signs of crime scene staging, and that in turn could help law enforcement and criminologists to proactively search for what evidence to focus on or what to investigate further, where there are hints of staging, and so on. Now, this notion of a decision support system for crime scene staging is something that our criminologist collaborators were quite excited about as the idea. But of course, that's a lot of work and that will require a lot of things. So that's a big question. How do we get there? That question remains. How do we get to the point of having a decision support system for law enforcement to be able to pick up early on potential signs of crime scene staging and help them, support them, push them in the right direction? Well, it involves a number of steps and a whole lot of collaborative research efforts between conceptual modelers and criminologists. In particular, the biggest collaboration between modelers and criminologists will involve modeling all those past cases to do exactly what we've been doing in this paper, capturing those kind of detailed behavioral patterns, linking them together, how soft evidence was manipulated, and that of course has to be done retroactively for cases where we know what happened and how it happened. And then taking all that kind of input, we could start modeling the typical behavioral patterns in particular contexts, kinds of crimes, kinds of social cultural contexts, and linking how such criminal actions threaten law enforcement's ability to uncover what really happened in cases, and putting that all in a wider context of the criminological insights, and very importantly, yet of course tricky to do from a modeling perspective, the social cultural context of all the relevant criminal and law enforcement behaviors, it would hopefully be feasible to build exactly such a decision support system that can both proactively point towards potentially suspicious behavioral patterns for a given context, say in case of femicide combinations such as the victim's partner reporting a suicide while the victim's family saw no indicators to support this, and to provide general indications of what not to miss during initial crime scene investigations. Anyway, that was a brief overview of this perhaps unexpected collaboration between conceptual modelers and criminologists. Thank you for sitting through it, and I hope it didn't shock you too much if it's as early in the morning for you as it was for me when I recorded this. Hopefully, I'm there live with you right now in Zoom to chat about this work or anything else that you might be interested in. But otherwise, and also afterwards, if you want to get in touch, just tweet me at Dirk V. Linden or check out my website for any other up-to-date contact details. Thank you again, and look forward to seeing you in the chat.